Hello everyone. So we are back with our Fun Facts Friday. We're reading, basically, I'm putting this magazine into my own words, so you don't have to read it. It's Life, Walt Disney from Mickey to the Magic Kingdom, and it was released for the 50th year, 50 years of Disney World. It's got like the Disney castle on the back. It's a really interesting read. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, check it out. We talked a little bit about Disney's early life and why he came up with Mickey Mouse, and that Mickey Mouse's original name was going to be Mortimer Mouse. Like, I'm glad his wife suggested the name Mickey, because it's just so much more friendly than Mortimer. I have my Disney ILY doll, because if you watch my 12-inch Disney ILY Forever doll review on the Tiana-inspired doll, you'll notice Minnie was a little jealous. So we brought her out, because this is a Disney video. The section we're on today is Mickey Makes His Mark, and it's about how one black and white cartoon changed cinema with sound and gave birth to an entire empire. And it's got a little tidbit on like the bottom here. It says, though Mickey Mouse began as Walt's alter ego, an irresponsible, optimistic, rebellious creature whose pluck resonated with Americans mired in the Great Depression, it wasn't long before he became a bland corporate mascot. His image evolved, but his character did not, despite the fact that Walt was trying to keep him relevant with such projects as The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Oh, I loved the Disney Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey Mouse movie. I thought it was so cute. I bet it's on Disney Plus. Though Walt was the original voice of Mickey, he eventually gave it up, perhaps because his chain smoking had made falsetto impossible. Yeah, I'd imagine smoking did some damage to Walt's voice. This is Mickey from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. He's looking cute with his little hat. I love Mickey Mouse so much. So let's get into this. Okay, so we have a picture here that is the 1928 Mickey Mouse. Short, Plain Crazy was co-written and directed by Walt, and his secret weapon, UB Works, the animator who was largely responsible for creating the look of both Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and Mickey Mouse. iWorks had worked with Walt in Kansas City, Missouri, shy and retiring, where his partner was outgoing and aggressive. Works was by far the better artist, which is something that Walt Disney himself said. We learned that in the last book, the last section of this magazine. Now, the plucky little rodents began kind of like Walt's life began. A little like scrappy. Mickey Mouse was made by 12 people after hours in a garage. iWorks did the defining drawing. The team quickly produced 3 Mickey shorts. The Tyro talent could not find a distributor. Oh, that's interesting. Out of sheer desperation, Walt hit upon a characteristically risky idea sound. In 1926, the upstart Warner Brothers Studios, seeking to establish itself, released Don Juan with a pre-recorded score and sound effects. Though a hit, the film did not revolutionize the industry. But 1 year later, a film called The Jazz Singer did, becoming a sensation by incorporating its singular star Al Jolson's dialogue into the drama. Even then, many in the industry considered quality sound technology an expensive and risky fad, which I find very interesting. But Walt was not among them. He had new ideas. He was very creative. He put all his resources into the development of sound cartoons. On one hand, he was driven by the fear of financial insecurity, but when he believed passionately about something, he was willing to take great risks. And indeed, he was taking a lot of risks. Cartoons had used sound before, but Disney hadn't. Steamboat Willie was unique in that its sound was synchronized, thanks to a system that was actually designed by Walt himself, which I find very interesting, and his colleague Wilfred Jackson. You gotta give credit to Mr. Jackson, too. The sound effects seem to originate in what the characters are doing on screen, and the action moves to the musical beat. By contrast, the earliest cartoon sound was essentially just pasted on with no organic relationship to the visuals. So that is very interesting to me. That, like, the sound didn't really go with the visuals, you know? Steamboat Willie premiered on November 18th, 1928 at the Colony Theater, which is actually located in New York, ahead of a now-forgotten film called Gang War. That seems like those are two very different movies. It became a sensation, making Mickey Mouse a worldwide star. Everybody liked Mickey. The children who thought he was funny, the philosophers who thought he represented America's ruckus individualism and aesthetes, who saw in him the first successful adjustment of linear design to the fluttering motion of the films. Overnight, Felix the cat found himself in the doghouse, and Oswald had disappeared down the rabbit hole. So Mickey Mouse did indeed beat out his competitors. Steamboat Willie was the first cartoon that used sound as a true complement to the visuals. For instance, a goat becomes a music box when Minnie Mouse turns its tail. The Mickey Mouse film became an instant smash, but it wasn't long before its star lost the impetuous quality that had made him famous. So in October 1929, the American stock market had collapsed, erasing $140 billion in funds virtually overnight. But the Great Depression that followed was, some have said, the best thing that ever happened to Walt Disney. For one thing, it meant that talented artists desperately needed jobs. So Walt went on a hiring spree and kept plugging his word for constant improvement. He instigated programs to distill great drawing and design into simple but beautiful and expressive lines and shapes as Cavalier. He also hired noticed artists and thinkers, among them architect Frank Lloyd Wright, to give lectures at the studio, driving his team on to ever greater excellence. So they saw every ballet and every film. If the film was good, we would go see it 5 times. Walt was industrializing the animation process without killing the artistry. He and his people analyzed the characteristics of movement of human and animals, the way living creatures move when they are feeling particular emotions, he says. So that's interesting. In the process, Walt transformed the medium from a vehicle for crude gags to what became known as character animation. It was no longer just moving things. It was real acting with real emotion. Walt and Roy approached the Disney art as pure product too. The merchandising business began in an offhand way in 1930 when somebody paid Walt $300 for the right to put Mickey on a line of stationery. Before long, there were Mickey Mouse lunchboxes, playing cards, bridge favors, candy, watering cans, and soap, just to name a few. And there actually is plenty of Mickey Mouse merchandise today as well. Disney does use merchandising to its advantage. And the Mickey Mouse watch became the most popular timepiece in America. So this is Mickey Mouse in Steamboat Willie. That's like one of the drawings on here, which I find so cute. And that's Minnie with a little goat. So when explorers hacked their way through the least penetrable jungle of Brazil, the first little boy to greet them was wearing a Mickey Mouse sweater. Now, Mickey Mouse, there was a Disney crew, there's a picture of the Disney crew shown at Hyperion Studio in 1929. In these early days, a spirit of camaraderie prevailed, but the animator's strike changed all that. Walt wasn't giving them the credit and the financial rewards that he was reaping. And at the same time, he was saying we are all a family together on this amazing journey of learning, pioneering, and creation. Well, you can't have it both ways. So this is the crew that, worked with Walt Disney. As Walt's success grew and he kept hiring, his employees became surrogate sons. He called them his boys. Increasingly, he viewed the studio as the home that he had never had. His drive to achieve the success and financial security he craved, and his obsession with family entertainment, family values, a family atmosphere at his studio, stemmed from his childhood insecurities. But Walt was more like his father than he wanted to believe. He actually had Elias's temper, often lashing out at his boys, according to biographer Neil Gabler. One of them was Fritz Freleng. And the interesting thing about Fritz Freleng is that he helped to create the iconic Looney Tunes franchise at Warner Brothers. And he claimed that Walt became very abusive and harassed him. Still, Walt had a knock for inspiring his people with enthusiasms, leading them all to believe, as he did, that their work was a calling, a mission, even a religion. "We'd hate to go home at night," said Iwerks, "and we couldn't wait to get to the office in the morning." But no one worked harder than Walt, who virtually lived at the studio, a fact that sometimes led to tension at home. "I love Mickey Mouse more than any woman I've ever known," Walt once told animator Ward Kimball. Indeed, Lillian told Time magazine she was a mouse widow, claiming that her husband only ever talked about his alter ego Mickey. When Walt was hailed as a genius, Lillian responded with, "Try living with one." Still, their bond was real and enduring. So there was Mickey Mouse floats down the New York City's Broadway in the 1934 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Mickey Mouse would have been fame enough for most men, the New York Times wrote in Walt's obituary. In France, he was known as Mitchell Saurus, in Italy, Topolino, in Japan, and Mickey Cucci in Spain. I think that's how it's pronounced. And so Mickey was actually known by different names in different places. Here is the parade. I love that they included a picture of that. I find that very cool. I really like old pictures and photographs. That's something that I just have always felt drawn to. In 1931, Disney's domestic situation seemed about to change when Lillian became pregnant. Child-loving Walt was thrilled, but her miscarriage, combined with Walt's ever-increasing workload, led to a breakdown. He later said, "I went all to pieces. Costs were going up. I was always way over what they figured the pictures would bring in. I got very irritable. I got to a point that I couldn't talk on the telephone. I'd begin to cry." Following doctor's orders, Walt took his first vacation, traveling across the country with Lillian. He had the time of his life. It was the first time they'd ever been away on anything like that since they were married. So Walt felt very refreshed and rejuvenated. He followed his doctor's advice by adding exercise to his routine, and he'd get up at like 5:30 a.m. in the morning, which is like wicked early, to play golf in Griffith Park. But he remained a driven workaholic, a fact that didn't change when in 1933, the Disneys finally welcomed a daughter, Deanne. So Deanne Disney was born. In 1937, they adopted a second daughter, Sharon. Walt doted on his children, maybe even more so than the comparatively reserved Lillian did, but his work consumed him, and he often missed their birthdays, though he rarely had leisure time. Walt started hobnobbing with the Hollywood. Oh, there's a picture here, and it's the band concert, 1935. The first Mickey Mouse film in color was the inspiration decades later for Silly Symphony Swings, an attraction at Disney California Adventure Park. Walt was the first to use Technicolor in commercial films, beginning in 1932. Silly Symphony Flowers and Trees. Because no one was sure how audience would react to the new technology, the short was simultaneously produced in black and white, but the premiere of the color version at Grauman's Chinese Theater caused a sensation. So that is a really cool picture. I like that. So where were we? Walt began hobnobbing with the elite, mostly through the then faddish sport of polio. But polio was not without hazards. A fellow player died in 1935, and Walt himself suffered a neck injury that would trouble him for the rest of his life. In 1929, with the release of The Skeleton Dance, Walt inaugurated a new cartoon series called Silly Symphonies. We wanted a series which would let us go in for more of the fantastic and fabulous lyric stuff, Walt said, using music to drive the animation rather than merely augment it. These nearly avant-garde shorts went far beyond anything that had ever been done, making the Disney studios the envy of every animator, if not filmmaker, in the world. They have a picture of Lillian and Walt, who was not much given to relaxation, but in 1930s he embraced the Hollywood penchant for polo, even creating a 1936 short called Mickey's Polo Team, in which the mouse competes with the likes of Laurel Hardy, Harpo Marx, and Charlie Chaplin. There's also a picture of Walt there with one of the horses. But they were more than merely aesthetic. Always plussing, Walt used symphonies to test new technical developments, such as Technicolor, Flowers and Trees, the first cartoon to win an Oscar, and the multi-plane camera, a device that created an unprecedented illusion of realism and depth. In the 1937's The Old Mill, which won yet another Oscar, but the Silly Symphony highlight was the sophisticated character animation that fueled 1933's The Three Little Pigs. Nothing like this had been seen in earlier cartoons, where the intent was not to bring the characters to life, but to slide by with as few drawings as possible, says Barrier. Even the hypercritical Walt knew it. At last we had to have achieved true personality in a whole picture, he said. The Three Little Pigs and its iconic song, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, became a sensation in the midst of the Depression. It was the first cartoon tune to become a hit. But you can't top pigs with pigs, Walt said, even as he remained determined to top himself. In the 1920s, Disney met a stranger on a train who was interested to hear that he produced motion pictures. But when Disney told him that he made cartoons, the man lost interest. This is the kind of attitude that rifled Disney and drove him, for a while at least, to make something more grown-up and serious and respected. Nothing Walt had ever done, or arguably ever would, was as grown-up and serious and respected as his next project. Though the idea had been percolating for years, in the spring of 1933, Walt called his employees into the Hyperion soundstage. There he sat in a spotlight and for several hours did what he did best. He told a story. So the next part is the Big Five, and it's how the first feature-length cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, led to an unprecedented run of classic films. But we're not going to read that part yet. We're not going to go over the facts from it. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to do that in another Fun Facts Friday. Let me know if you've enjoyed learning about Walt Disney with me.